Well, just the potential, I think. I think you bring up a good point. Steve Lavin coming to USD has brought with it a lot of attention, which is great for college athletics, no matter if it's volleyball or basketball or baseball, whatever it is. Attention for your program is both wonderful as a reward for what's done and accomplished, but it's also great for how the program builds, and it's a very important part of that foundation. So that's what Coach Lavin has brought to USD. It's an important part of the offseason because gives the Toreros a little bit of buzz, gives them a little bit of attention, and we'll see what that translates to with so many different new players on the roster and a new foundation to be built. But at least it's that recognition for the program itself.
And yeah, with Steve Lavin coming in, obviously he brings a good amount of cachet. Obviously, even though he hasn't been coaching it's now been 7 years since he last coached at St. John's, but he's always been connected to the game. He remains in the know to an extent, like especially here on the West Coast, where he lives out here and everything else. He's always pretty connected to what's going on. And even he's broadcasting a fair number of WCC games over the years. So kind of like with what sort of level of expectation, at least early on, is there with Steve Lavin being in the building, and what was kind of the excitement as that an announcement was made?
Yeah, it was. It was very exciting. It was a big name. And to your point, he hasn't been in coaching for a couple of years since the St. John's did. But remember, he was so young at UCLA as an assistant winning the national championship and then going deep in the postseason as the head coach. He's only 58 right now as he takes over USD in his third stint as a coach. But what he brings is, first of all, he's a great storyteller, great orator. He is a guy who can command a room, and he's really he brings a little bit of kind of the experience and success that you then can build upon here. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen or happen immediately at San Diego. But what it does is it gives you that potential and hope that you say, okay, what can this program become? And that's what's exciting to watch over this year, maybe a couple of years, and then we'll see down the line. Absolutely. So that's what it brings, is that it's somebody who has been there, had success before, both as a broadcaster, high profile, high nationwide level, but also as a great coach as well, two very high profile programs in UCLA and St. John's.
And we've seen some of that success. Obviously, he has 8 NCAA tournament appearances in those 12 years, 2 NIT appearances. So when he's been able to take over, and I think the St. John's is probably the closer comparison point, obviously, than UCLA, where he took over a program that was already well established. That this was a program that was kind of trying to get back on its feet and was able to do so pretty quickly at St. John's. Obviously, Big East team, so there's a little bit of a higher profile there than maybe what the WCC is as a whole. But it does seem to he's able to turn these programs around pretty quickly and be able to kind of get them back up to being at a really high competitive level. So let's kind of dive into some of there's a lot of new faces in this building now, and whether you can kind of dive into whether it be Jaden Dallaire, you can dive into Eric Williams, Nick Lynch. There's a lot of new faces here. What have you heard from maybe the coaches, or what have you seen from some of the new guys that should kind of give us some excitement for the coming season, what we're going to see?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, there's going to be 17 players on the roster. That includes walk-ons, but 17 players on the roster, and only 5 of them are returning for San Diego. Now, since the Toreros went to the NIT in 2019, there has been a fair amount of roster turnover over the last several seasons, each season in a row. But this year, obviously, different because it's a different coach. And you mentioned the 2 most high-profile players who are coming in. Both are Pac-12 players: Eric Williams from Oregon and Jaden Dallaire from Stanford. Given the Pac-12 pedigree and success they have had, and they're older players, so they've been given the extra season because of the pandemic and everything else involved. They are older graduate players, which are always so incredibly valuable. One of my most favorite parts of college basketball is the grad transfer. I think it's an incredible part of the game. I think it's a reward for both programs, the one the player is coming from and the player going to, the success in the classroom, the success on the court. In college basketball, the grad transfer is one of the most amazing parts of the game. And so now you've got 2 of them leading the way among 12 new players for USD. Those are the 2 most high profile who will join, but there are guys up and down the roster who've had success, places like Weber State and otherwise, but they also join for remaining scholarship players in Jace Townsend and Wayne McKinney and Marcellus Erlington and Ibuzko Tekin. There are players returning, some of which have been starters. A lot of them, all four of those guys have been starters at one point for USD here. So it's the blending of the newcomers and the returners among 17 on the roster for San Diego that will be the excitement of the non-conference, right? It'll be the excitement of how do they build in the early part of the season, who plays where. There are only 200 minutes a game to go around here. Who gets where? So, I mean, that's the exciting part to have for San Diego and for a new coach like Steve Lavin, who's so high profile.
And I think that seems kind of like the thing is like, because there are so many new guys, there's going to be a lot of competition for those spots and for those minutes. And to an extent, that kind of sounds like it should actually benefit the Toreros in the long run over the course of the season, as they kind of like do compete for these minutes, because they're not really established roles, even for the returning guys, because there are so many new players coming in, new head coach, that they may not necessarily be guaranteed the old spots that they did have, even though obviously we got to see a lot from Marcellus Earlington last year. We saw that he could be an all-conference type guy. We saw some of the potential from Wayne McKinney, and obviously, like, one of the biggest things was, as the coaching transition happened, those two entered the portal immediately, and then Steve Lavin was able to bring them back into the fold. It's kind of, how important was it to bring back at least some of the guys who were here a year ago to kind of be able to speak to what the culture is at San Diego, or at least like kind of like get some of the new guys like acclimated to the campus and the town and everything else.
Sure, absolutely. I think players have that right. They should. I mean, if they want to look, we got a coaching change. We're going to test out and see what's the best fit for me academically and obviously on the court as well. I think they should. I think it's wonderful that those two and all four of them came back to San Diego. At one point, all four were starters. Wayne McKinney's the highest rated high school recruit ever to come to San Diego. Jace Townsend, when he was healthy before he broke his hand last year, was the best player on the court. And then you mentioned Marcellus Earlington, who can play multiple positions, and maybe that is a role for him, who can shoot, but he's also a bigger guy, he can play inside. That's a flexibility when you have 12 newcomers and 17 players overall on the roster that will allow you to get more minutes and be valuable to the team in many, many different ways. So, yeah, I think it is important. Look, it's up to each player. Each player has their own life, their own goals, their own successes. And so I think, yes, it's wonderful that those four came back. And that's a great sign for Coach Lavin and for the program itself, too. Continuity, sure. Building something along the campus, JCP, which is a new floor now, and you got a new energy. And I think you're right. I think it's a blending of those things that is an important factor. We will see here come the second week in November, really where these guys get going.
And so and again, because there's such a fresh start, you don't want to take too much from a year ago, because San Diego was a team that like really started WCC play well. They kind of got off that 6-3 start, and then yes, it kind of like started to crumble a little bit at the back end. But then also you kind of looked at their schedule. It was like you had Gonzaga, St. Mary's twice, USF. Like, it was a brutal back half of the schedule for San Diego. But it also kind of like, for those returners, like, it's like, this was a team that was really good defensively. This was a team that had an identity there. And how much of that identity is going to kind of stick around, or is because we have kind of like brand new all over the place? So like that may not be the team, that may not be the identity of the team we see this year.
Yeah, I don't think we know. And that's what's fun about it, right? Is spending the non-conference, which, in other seasons may be something you're waiting for that Gonzaga or St. Mary's game, right? Or BYU contest. But this time it's like, okay, what's going on? This is great. This is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to grow. There's nothing that's set in stone that the Toreros have to play one way or the other. It's maximizing the talents and abilities of these young men to give them the best opportunity. Some of these players are going to be the last year of college basketball, the last chance to be part of a team like this, and to play for a coach like Steve Lavin, and in a place like San Diego, as you mentioned, a great place, an opportunity. So we don't know. It could go any of those ways. We don't even have the schedule yet. As you and I talked today,
Yeah.
the schedule isn't even finalized right now for San Diego. So let's see how it goes. That it is an excitement, and there are different ways of doing things. I go back to 2019 for the Toreros, who made the NIT. Well, they had essentially four guys who played every minute of that season and led the Toreros to the NIT, one of the best teams in program history. But then you've also got teams that have come together in 1 year. The 08 team that won an NCAA tournament game, beat UConn in the NCAA tournament game. They had played together for essentially 1 year and just came together. So it's different ways of things. They had a new coach at that time, Bill Greer, right? Like, it was It's different ways of building things, and there's no right or wrong answer right now. What is the right way is to see how these players do on the floor, and that's what's exciting.
I was in the building at Jenny Craig Pavilion when that '08 team made its tournament
Oh,
runs. I remember that one very well.
that's
And that was an
awesome.
incredible
That's
that was an
awesome.
incredible San Diego team. Like not making having to run that gauntlet, going through St. Mary's and going through Gonzaga to get that auto bid was amazing. I was still a student at St. Mary's at the time, and so I was in the band, so I was there for that trip. And I remember even in the NCAA tournament during the tournament, like we were off. I think we were in Little Rock for the tournament, and we got back to the hotel after we lost, and we're watching San Diego play, and we were just like all rooting for the Toreros. So like someone actually kind of like someone actually make us all proud because we had lost, Gonzaga had lost, and so we were waiting for like we needed somebody in the conference to represent. So that was a fun team, and I'm actually kind of glad that Rob Jones actually moved back up north, but that was really exciting. San Diego team, a really good squad at that point. Um, and there, so this team, even though we haven't seen kind of anything on the court yet, we haven't kind of seen any practices. There is a fair amount of at least expectation that this is going to be a team that's going to be far improved than a year ago. We had like the John Rothsteins actually say it's like, hey, this is one of like the 5 teams that is going to be vastly improved from a year ago. For a team that may not be actually kind of like all put together and still figuring things out, how do you think that they're going to at least handle kind of like these external expectations, or is this a kind of a group of Steve Lavin kind of like I'm kind of like tuning the external out because all we can do is kind of focus internally?
Those are great questions. And, I think the latter is probably more true. It's a first year. I mean, it's a first year. Any coach, whether it's Steve Lavin or somebody that you haven't heard of, it has to build up the family, the program, the what are the internal goals and relationships and all these things that go into being part of a human group. And so anybody was going to do that. And so the answer is we have no idea for this particular season, but it's not necessarily about this season. It could be, to your point. I mean, John Rothstein and some of these other nationwide guys who cover the sport, they've all known Coach Lavin. In fact, Rothstein worked with Lavin on some of the broadcasts in the postseason,
Yeah.
right? Like it's they know him, right? They all know him, and therefore they respect what he can do. But it isn't about day one. It's not about November of this year. It's not even about March of this year. It would be great to have that, but it's more about how do you build up a program that has a wonderful facility that's in one of the best cities in the entire world, and in a great conference that has great competition game in and game out, that sent multiple teams and always does the NCAA tournament. How do you become one of those and build up the program over several seasons, not just here this year?
And I think there's also like with San Diego, there is a lot of opportunity because of so many of the changes and the coaching changes and the new players and the guys who did come back. I think there's at least a fair amount of expectation that San Diego is going to be in that conversation in that say like that third to seventh place window where like there's a lot of like flux between the USFs, the BYU's, Santa Clara's, Pepperdine, like Portland. Like there were a lot of teams I think who are going to be like in the mix when it comes to like pole positioning for Vegas and getting kind of like put their positioning for the postseason. And because it seems far more wide open this year, it does seem like that there's an opportunity for San Diego to kind of make its mark, at least like as they kind of get it together before conference play to kind of make sure that they know who they are, they have an identity as they kind of go in. And probably for a lot of the WCC teams where you kind of like, oh, we have at least some familiarity with each other. When you have a new coaching staff and new style, it's like there may not be that familiarity. So San Diego could also then catch some teams off guard, at least in the early part.
It's a great call, and it's always the question, right? In the WCC is who's going to finish behind Gonzaga in what order right now, right? Like where are things going to shake out? I love the double, triple bye, into the semifinals for the top 2 seeds. It protects you and rewards you for a regular season that has been accomplished. And so a team like Gonzaga obviously is going to be there. St. Mary's has carried the banner for more than a decade now.